How you doing, YouTube? Merry Christmas and Happy Holidays. Don't know if I'll be able to get this up on or before Christmas, but just working on the tractor a little bit between obligations. Over the week, I received the bushings that I needed from McMaster Car, as well as the Torrington bearings for the WheelHorse from McMaster Car. The bearings are the bushings, excuse me, are a little interesting. They sell a couple sizes of bushings. Basically what you need is a 1-inch inner diameter for the axle shaft and 1 1/8 outer diameter in order to press fit into the axle tube on the tractor. Now they sell now the overall length is supposed to be 1.5 inches, but nobody that I have been able to find actually sells 1.5 inches wide bushing. So you have to do one or two things. You can pay the $17 and get the 1 inch by 1 1/8 by 4 inches and then cut it down. But that's $17, that one bushing. So if you kind of mess it up, could be a pricey mistake. Or you can buy 4 1 inch by 1 1/8 outer diameter by 1 inch length, and then just put 2 of them into the axle tube is what I did. And those are like $2. So you get all 4 of them for $8 and you don't have to do anything. And basically, I should have probably showed you what I did, but it's really not that difficult. Take the bushing, the first one, put it in. I happen to have a socket that is absolutely perfect for this installation. It fits just inside the axle tube. I mean, it's like 1 1/8 minus like 0.02 in width. So it fits just inside. So put the first bushing in, use a dead blow hammer, just pound it in there, get it to about 1 inch in depth and internal, inside. Then take the second 1 inch bushing, gently tap it in, and then just seat it with the socket so it's just inside the axle tube. So then you basically have 2 inches worth of bearing surface. These are the oil light ones, so they have that SEA 30 oil impregnated in them. Now here is the other side. Both the bushings are installed exactly the same way. Quite simple. When you do press those bushings or tap those bushings in, it does create a inner diameter that's just a little bit smaller than 1 inch. So you do have to hone out the bushings in order to fit your axle shaft, even if it's an old one. And the way I do that is I use a brake hone. And here's a little gadget that I use to hone the bushings out with. Just an old school brake cylinder hone. It actually should have a 3rd stone, but it doesn't fit inside the 1 inch inner diameter bushing, so I have to take one of the stones off, and I just take this little bad boy on my drill with some oil. I just shove it into the hole here. Oops, sorry. And then I just spin it, just honing in and out, test fitting the axle until it fits in there real nice. Go to the other side, do the exact same thing. Then slide the axle all the way through, spin it by hand. Make sure you got just slight resistance. You don't want it loose, just slight resistance. And then the axle should be in place. All right, I'm going to get that done because that is like really, really boring shit watching me do that. So I should be back with the axle semi-installed. Just like I said, you're just going to keep going back and forth with your brake hone and test fit that axle until it fits just snug. And don't be fooled. It does take material off. It does get that surface down with that brake hone. You just got to be careful. And as you can see, I don't know if yeah, you can, yeah, there you go. You can actually see the hone marks in the bushing. Just like you're doing a cylinder. Just back and forth, back and forth, back and forth until it fits. All right, well, I just got done doing the bushing on this side with the brake hone. And it seems to work quite good. Just line it up. You can see by the Woodruff key that it is sliding in. There is some chatter only because the bushing is dry. There, you heard that little tunk? Right there. I'm hitting the bushing on the opposing side because I haven't honed that out yet. But as you can tell, it doesn't really need a lot of force for it to spin. You do want it a touch tight. It is just a touch tight. You can hear that when it's drying. Excuse me, when the bushing's dry. And for that reason is, as you ride the tractor, it'll hone itself in. But essentially, just give it a little bit of a twist and a tug. And this guy comes right out. Okay, well, it's in. Took a little bit longer than I anticipated. For whatever reason, these two bushings on this side just took a lot of honing, but there's absolutely zero play in the shaft. I mean, this thing is nice and tight in the bushings, but they're just, and if I'll just be real quiet, you probably can just hear the sound of the bushings. But I'm not putting very much pressure on this. You can see, look, I mean, I do need all my hand to turn it, but there's just a slight drag on those bushings, and that's what you want because they're going to hone in to themselves. Because you got to remember, it's not a line board, so it might be touching a little bit on this edge of the bearing. The other side might be touching a little on the inside. Who knows? But over the course of time, that will hone itself. Next up, I'm going to put the big gear on. I am going to put the entire hub assembly on this side. That way I can start to align the axle shaft in the tube in order to weld the big gear on. Okay, I'll be right back. Okay, so what are we looking at here? What I've done is I obviously have the axle still in place. I put the right hub, if you're sitting on the tractor, in place with the paw collar inside. Let's just pull that out real quick. There you go. There's the paw collar. And the Woodruff keys in place to hold the paw collar in place. So we'll just slide that on. Okay. And we notice we have the end of the axle shaft. Over here, I put the gear case cover on with just a couple bolts just to hold it in place. And I put the big iron gear in the gear case so I know it's there. Same thing. The paw collar with the Woodruff keys in there, and then I put the hub on. So what we're going to need to do, and as you can tell right here, there's a pretty good gap here, which we don't particularly want. We want that gap to actually be a little thinner. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to pull the Woodruff keys out, because as I stated in another video, I'm going to have to knock the corner of the Woodruff key down in order to suck these hubs closer to the backing plates. So let me do that. Let's see where we land in this process of lining up the axle in the appropriate area in order to weld the main gear onto the axle shaft in the appropriate place. Okay, now we have the Woodruff keys out, and as you can see, that gap is much more appropriate on either side. So I know I have the axle shaft semi-centered and correct in the axle tube. What I'm going to do now is, there is a fairly large amount of space between the cotter pin and the face of the hub, so I'm going to have to build this up with some bronze washers. Not completely correct, but when you have a bent axle shaft and you have to make a new one, that's the small price you pay. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to slip this off and make sure my measurement from the backing plate to the end of the axle shaft is the same as the fascia of the gear case to the end of the axle shaft. So that way I know I have everything lined up the best I possibly can have it. Then I'm going to take everything off
and mark this end of the axle shaft. And the reason for that is because I'm going to justify off of this backing plate or the end of this axle tube. I'm going to measure from here to the inside. I'll take the gear case cover off, the inside of the axle shaft, and make a mark. That's where the big iron gear is going to get welded on. So that's what we're going to do next. We're going to do those marks. We're going to weld that gear on. Okay, well, I have the main gear basically located, and this is how I located it. I know that there's absolutely no play between the bearing face on the outside and the bearing face on the inside of that gear down there. So this is a stagnant gear. It doesn't walk. I know that this gear is, you know, basically flush mounted to the face of the bearing, which is right here, which is even with this end of the pipe. So I put this in place, and as you could tell, those two gears line up because there's a chain that runs off this to those two gears, and that's what provides the power to the axle. So when it comes to this main gear, what I did was, as you can tell, I just moved it out just a hair, so I got room to put some weld on the back side of the gear, and we're nice and clean and flush on this side. I slipped the gear case cover on, and we know that it's clear. There's nothing that rubs. So I'm going to take a Sharpie marker, and I'm going to make a nice clean mark all the way around this axle shaft. That's going to locate my gear. Then I'll pull the axle out, or, you know, take all this off, pull the axle out. But just before I did that, I did make a pen mark on this end, the right side, I called it. So I know that this didn't move when I was doing all my measurements and my adjustments. So it looks like it's in the same spot. Plus the bushings are a little tight, so there's really no way that the axle is going to move. So I know that I justified my hub. I justified my hub to the gear case cover. So I know that this axle shaft is basically where I want it. Installed the gear, that sets my where that gear is supposed to be, the lower one. And I know that this gear needs to ride basically in the center of that forward gear, this little gear. Let me get it from a better angle. Of course, it's going to be too dark. So it's, oh, there we go. So basically, I'm going to run it right in the middle of that gear. And with that, I know it should work. All right. I'm going to pull this apart. I'm going to get welding. Hopefully the next... Here comes some asshole in his fart can. I can't stand those Hondas anymore. But anyways, excuse me. What we're going to do is we're going to make that mark, weld up that gear, and loosely put it all back together. I probably will put the bearings in the top end here. That way we know everything's all happy. All right, be right back. Okay, well, the basic setup is all done. We're ready to weld. I got my gear on my marked line. I put my 90-degree angle into place so that way we have it square. I put the other 90-degree angle in the other opposing direction so that way I know it's square, and I think we should be all set. I mean, I'm just going to go get the welder. I'm going to weld around the entire exterior of the gear face. I will do the same on this side also. Okay, well, there it is. It's welded up and works pretty good. There is a little bit of gear clash between those two gears. You can hear them kind of vibrating together, but I think that's because this gear is, where's my finger? There it is. This gear is a little bit worn from the, or bent axle shaft, or the original one when the gear was going like this, riding on it. So I think just over the course of time that will go away, but as you can tell, spins pretty good. There is a little tiny bit of wobble. I mean, the gear walks just maybe just a touch, but everything is in good shape. So I'm going to move on and we'll get to the next step of putting this together.
Okay, we're back, and as you can see, we have the gear case basically back together. We have the big gear that we just welded onto the axle, really nice. I did put a little bit of engine assembly lube on the bushings, that way it stays lubed up when we first start it. I installed the 2 upper bearings, just tapped them in place. Again, used just a little engine assembly lube in the rollers, so that way they stayed lubed up initially. I put a little bit of grease on the gear down there, and as well as onto the backing plate. And now it runs real smooth. So what we're going to do here is we're going to take a chance with my phone. I'm going to hand it to my little daughter, who's going to hold it while I show you that it works pretty smooth. So here we go. Goodbye, Samsung. No. Say hi, Oli.
Hi.
All right, there we go. So now you know it's definitely somebody here. I'm just going to hold this so it doesn't walk off the shaft. And Oli, go this way. I'm going to spin the input shaft to show you that. Well, I'm going to spin the input shaft. It's just going to be off camera. And you're going to see that this works quite smooth. Okay, bring it back over here. And actually, if we turn it that way, everything works. There's no chatter. Everything seems real nice and smooth and clean. So I think we're all set. Tomorrow's supposed to be warmer, so I'm going to goo up the gear case cover and put that back together. Okay, now for the gear case cover, basically got to give it a good cleaning all the way around. One thing you want to kind of keep in mind when you're cleaning the sealing surface of these gear case covers, I'm hoping I can show you, there's small striations in the gear case cover. And what that's for is, what's that for? And I'm hoping this camera will pick it up for you. There it is right there. See those striations? The reason for those striations is to keep your sealer from oozing out, to really bite in. So make sure when you clean this, use a cookie wheel and then ultimately a good wire wheel and go all the way around. That way you can get those striation grooves. Let's see if we can get that thing to focus up one more time for us. Well, you can see them over here. Get those good and clean. So that way when you put that sealer in there, and I just use black RTV, and I mean, you put it on like, whew, I mean, you put a hell of a friggin' bead on that, and then you let it set up for at least a couple days before you put any gear oil in this. It is cool outside, so I'm probably not gonna put gear oil in it until the springtime, but just wanted to give you that little tidbit that I do to try to keep these things from leaking all over the place over the course of time. All right, well, the gear case cover is finally mounted. Everything lines up really, really nice. It looks good. It spins super smooth. There's no resistance whatsoever in the drive. Real happy. So what did I do to finish it all up? I mounted the belt pulley. This is the very drive belt goes to this pulley. That's what turns our jack shaft, which turns the chain. The chain in turns the big gear that we welded on. You have to mount this pulley first before putting on the gear case cover, only because the shaft moves and you won't be able to get this pulley on if you have the gear case cover on it, because the shaft will slide in when you're trying to put this pulley on. But it's on, it's mounted. It's great. The only thing about the gear case cover that's really kind of, I guess what I do is make sure both sides, the gear case cover face and the backing plate, are squeaky clean, surgical clean. Use a lot of brake cleaner, get it done. This is one place where I say more is more, in the sense of the gasket sealer. I put a ridiculous amount of gasket sealer on these because there's nothing worse than one of these things starting to weep oil after you've either restored it or refurbed it like I'm doing. That really kind of stinks. Every single bolt, I ran every single original bolt through a die. That way the threads are nice and clean. Same thing, I used a finishing threader
or restore from it through the holes in the gear case cover. That way we know we had no issues. And then I put a little tit of gasket sealer on each one of the bolts. I like to use the original bolts compared to new bolts, only because it kind of goes with the whole patina theme. I torqued these bolts to 120 inch-pounds in the best crisscross pattern that I can, meaning, you know, side to side, top to bottom. So that way that gear case cover gets squeezed on real nice and smooth. After all that is installed and torqued in, it is a little cold today, so I use the heat gun just to warm the metal up a little bit. The last thing to do, I'll just pull this off real quick. Actually, the next project is to restore these paws. That'll be for a later day, not today or this video. Install a new grease seal or oil seal, whichever way you want to call it. All right, so the gear drive, the chain drive, the gear case, all of that is complete. We're going to move on to the paws, and thank God this axle project came out pretty good. As always, I forget something. What I do is I am not going to put gear oil in this for at least, I don't know, I let them sit for like a week or so to make sure all that sealer is good and cured before I put gear oil in it. I'm actually not even going to put gear oil in this thing until probably the springtime, only because it's cold. I'm not going to drive it or anything like that. But that's just another little tidbit I forgot to say. All right, guys. Thanks. Bye.